last left off, I found that my engine harness was a little bit crispier than an engine harness should be. Unfortunately, I'm in an E36 specific text group where just about everybody has been in the process or already done an S54 swap. Unfortunately, our friend in that group, Oliver von Meisener, had an S52 harness laying around in storage, and out of the grace of his heart, he sent it to me for use, and that problem was then solved for now. We'll be back to that. Another item in prep of putting the engine back together was the M50 manifold, and I had a few friends hounding me saying I had to do this, but I really didn't want to pay eBay prices, so I said I'd only do it if I could find one in a junkyard. Ironically, I did, and ironically, it was $36, which is pretty cool. So getting this thing set up, I had to do an M50 manifold swap kit. I got one from a place I'm not going to mention because I really didn't like the quality of it, so we're going to move on from that. But once that was prepped, we could put it in the engine bay and get this sealed up and almost ready to get fired up. And to mention as well, while I still had the front end off the car, I decided to replace all of the seals on the AC lines in the engine bay. It was just the best time to do this with the best access, not having a front end there. And with the engine fully assembled, I decided to throw the airbox in there as well to create what was almost like a BMW poster diagram of the S52 in the engine bay with X-ray vision, as if the front end wasn't there, because the front end isn't there right now. So I just thought this was a really cool point of view while we could see this engine now complete and in the engine bay. Next up were supporting bits like that drive shaft I painted since the rear end and transmission were obviously in, and of course fetched with Boone. Then I had to do the fuel filter, and of course seeing that the lines were all crusty around that, decided to take everything out and replace the lines along with the fuel filter. You'll notice I don't have the pin holding the fuel pressure regulator in. I'll find that out unfortunately later, but not a big deal. Moving on, I had the brakes, and while these were out, I wanted to clean them up and get them painted. I used Por 15 paint on these, not the brackets on the left, they aren't painted yet, until the primer here. I don't think I shot the coating until later, but I didn't love this coating for brakes, probably would only use it again on engine blocks. Then the e-brake shoes and assembly in the back. Can never remember how to do this, so hopefully if you need to remember, viewing this can help you too. Not that difficult, but remembering it, again, is always a little bit hard. And you'll see here in a second that I had this adjustment pin backwards, so it isn't really a big deal. It's just that the orientation makes it easier to expand it outwards when everything is assembled, which is definitely something you need to check and prep and set once everything is assembled to make sure your e-brake actually works, because sometimes you don't bleed your ABS pump correctly and then the rest of your brakes don't work well. And I might be foreshadowing. But moving on to rebuilding the calipers, I got the couple new seals in after a few tries and orientating the dust boot, and with those sealed up and in, I then moved on to these brass bushings, which I've always wanted to try because I've always had them stored in my basement to eliminate a little flex in these calipers. Next on the docket was reassembling the front end, which was going to be a little bit of a process to remember how to do so, because when we tore it down, I was not the only one doing it. I was more focused on parts organization, so being the one that wasn't hands-on makes it harder to remember how to put it back together. Fortunately, also, I had a little bit of an issue with an electrical connection for the coolant level sender. Ironically, it's the same connection as the level sender for the washer fluid. So initially I plugged it in for that, and if I got a warning that my washer fluid was low, then I knew I had an issue with coolant. But my super famous E28 M5 friend, Austin Caccavo, was in town, and he's a lot better with these electrical connections. So he took a look at the torn off pigtail from the original coolant level sender and said, I can probably reconnect those and fix that, and ironically he did. So super special shout out to Austin Caccavo for solving this problem for me, keeping all my OEM connections there and plugged into the things that they're actually supposed to be plugged into, something that Austin is very good at and even incorporates in his company AC Solutions, which helps keep cars like that beautiful E28 M5 in the background nice and cool on the interior, as well as the interior of my E28 and numerous E28s and E30s of our friends. So Austin Caccavo, extra special shout out to him, his company, and his brain. Boone, if you agree, wink. Oh, looks like Boone agrees. While Austin was here, we actually made an install video for the BMW E30, so if you have any interest in an AC kit or you're curious on the whole process, watch this video here or linked below. From here, all it took was putting the trim on, and the crowd went wild.
Wow, good job, buddy.
The body was fully assembled, and that was a good feeling to finally see this car looking like a whole car again. Since the AC Don himself was here, we decided to pull vacuum on the system, which held properly, which was very exciting, meaning I could charge it later. Then other little quips that we had to do before starting it up. Didn't notice these really weird exhaust mounts were really crappy, so we got those replaced. All in prep for this stainless steel Ireland Engineering catback exhaust with these rad DTM tips. I really can't believe how inexpensive this exhaust is for the look that it gives you in stainless, so it's worth checking out if you want to be a little bit louder of an E36. Then on to power bleeding the brakes. Again, this just didn't work very well. We'll jump back to that later. Moving on to coolant, I decided to use distilled water and a cleaner because I hadn't cleaned my radiator or my heater core previously. And of course, break-in oil, we used the Joe Gibbs Racing BR conventional 15W50, a little bit heavier of a break-in oil because of ambient temperatures, so on and so forth. So with that oil filled up, I did also do the transmission and differential, which meant every fluid was properly in this car at capacity and theoretically good to go, except for the brakes, which we'll go back to. Then the ceremonial cutting of the clutch pedal hole from this lower trim, got that put in, and suddenly this manual swap was complete. It's crazy. Shout out to TWERTLWAX. A day or so later, when I was less scared, it was time to drop this car down onto the ground and try to get it fired up. So the suspension settings had not been messed with at all. So of course, when we got it on the ground, we soon found out that the front end was way too low for what we wanted to deal with, and the rear end had amazing positive camber because I hadn't yet adjusted those lower arms. So we dealt with that a little bit on the front end, adjusting the suspension up. We got Jantz over because, again, I was a little scared with the first startup, wanted someone smart to be helping me out. Adjusted that to a proper ride height to not have to deal with any clearance, and honestly, I decided that we could just run this positive camber for the break-in run because it wasn't going to be that long. Look at how good that looks. But then, oh man, we plugged the battery in and I immediately smelled an electrical burning smell, and I didn't see it immediately, and about 10 or so seconds later I saw the smoke coming out from the harness. Oh, this is like deja vu, dude. So I immediately yelled for Jantz to disconnect the battery. Again, about 10, maybe 15 seconds of time connected, and then I ended up finding on the original harness where there was a burn, referenced that and found it in the exact same spot on this one. So to reference this quickly, this relay that we're dealing with is a secondary air pump relay, and that wire is a ground wire that's supposed to be switched off of to connect a hot at all times or always powered line to the secondary air pump when the car is started. So the non-powered secondary air pump's line is supposed to be grounded by the ground wire and then switched to the power when the car turns on, but as you see in the relay I was using, the switch is beyond these two lines, meaning that that ground was directly connected as soon as there was power to that powered line, frying that grounded wire. And this is the relay that we're supposed to be using. So I went and looked on the old harness. The relay had already been switched out at that point, but the exact same thing had apparently happened. So I pulled that stupid thing out, got the old one that's a switched one, put the correct relay on the main DME. Battery's plugged in right now. I think we're good. I think we're good, guys. No smoke. So all of that high energy talking to say that I disconnected that ground, as looking at the wiring diagram, we kind of confirmed that it wasn't really doing anything because the wire it was switched to with the relay before power was connected didn't have power anyway. So yeah, and secondary air pump thing, so hey. So with that disconnected, I also took a look in the rest of the harness, confirmed, because obviously power doesn't just stop when it hits the ground and it's connected to a junction of other grounds. It looked okay enough, and it was time to try firing this thing up. My favorite thing to watch here is Deb as she kind of looks at my roommate Mo like, why isn't this car starting? And then when the smoke starts to burn off of the engine paint, watch that too. Oh yeah, the engine starts. So a few things of note here. Obviously the valve train is going to be a little bit loud as it gets oiled up. Nice position Mo there. I do have a little bit of an exhaust rattle that I fixed later, and I do have a very loud fan OS unit that I also fixed later. And no, this time the car's not on fire, Deb. So as us ladies got our drinks ready to take the first drive, it only took about 2 seconds to realize I had no brakes. And I also even almost drove it off of this big drop-off behind my garage as I reversed back in. So scared the shit out of myself. But I didn't ever realize this. ABS pumps have a bleed screw, at least on the later models in these cars. So I didn't do that initially, and in doing so this time, plenty of air actually came out because I wasn't able to activate the ABS pump. I also realized that I had my brakes upside down. So the bleed screw is supposed to be on top of the cylinder, and it wasn't because obviously air rises. So with these oddities fixed, suddenly I had brake pressure, and then I decided not to tell anybody. And you know, at this point, I wasn't scared of anything. Well, I was kind of scared. Fixed my camber too. I just decided to go for it. It was time to fire this thing up for the first drive, get this bad boy broken in, and get it going. So aside from the initial fire up a few days ago where I kept the RPMs between 2,000 and 3,000 RPM, I decided to do the full break-in method of actually driving the car as recommended by a few friends and by Metric Mechanic as they build some of these old engines. And this process entails driving the car in second or third gear, doing repeated pulls at full power between 2,000 RPM and 4,000 RPM, steadily increasing each pull 100 RPM all the way up to 4,500 RPM. So do this about 10 or 15 times, and then consider the piston rings fully bedded into those piston walls. You'll also hear as I pull in and kill the power, a little bit of brake rub. I fix that later, so get off my back, dude. Seriously. So from here, obviously it was time to change the oil. The oil was dirtied up a little bit with the tiny little metal flakes, which is a welcome sign. Obviously you're bedding those rings. And with fresh oil in there, it was time to do the secondary break-in. Ironically, when I tried to do that, my fuel pressure regulator shot out because the retaining pin wasn't in there, but thank God it didn't happen during my break-in because how scary would that have been? Then decided to charge my AC and got a nice 43 at the vents. It seems like Ken Block's number keeps popping up everywhere. Rest in peace, Ken. And it was time to continue with my secondary break-in miles. Faster than E28. The brake pedal's still a little soft, but I probably need to reboot those again. But especially man, this costs a lot of money. I mean, it's great I had a sponsor, but it still costs like twice as much as you ever planned. Like it always happens. This is way too much money, but. And it feels really good to have this car complete, and look at this. And I still got to polish the paint and stuff, but what a freaking car, So with secondary break-in complete, it was time again for another oil change and dealing with any other problems that popped up. One being this. I've never seen this happen. So what I think happened is using the radiator cleaner with distilled water, the boiling point was a little bit lower than it should be with coolant, and the radiator cleaner allowed it to foam up a bit and cause more pressure. And honestly, in the end, it wasn't the worst thing because these hoses are gigantic and weird and probably old, and fortunately it was the weak point in the cooling system and exploded. So in getting those hoses replaced and the fluid dropped out and then doing a few flushes afterwards, I was pretty confident that I had a strong and now very clean cooling system. And just to be a little extra scared, I did do a head gasket test testing for exhaust gases inside the coolant. Again, just to make sure that my hose exploding wasn't being overpressurized from that. Fortunately, it wasn't. Tested all okay. We were clear for one final flush and adding the coolant. We were happy. So next up was coolant bleeding, and this is one thing that I never really realized before, but in the Bandley it suggests bleeding the coolant with the engine off. But the power on and the heater matrix turned on to full heat. Obviously the fan doesn't have to be turned up high, and apparently that allows you to get all of the air out of the system. I tried it the old school way with the engine on, couldn't quite get it. Tried it this way and it worked. So next up was going to be cleaning of some paint, and I couldn't do that though until I cleaned up and merchandised my product shelf of the always asked about TRTLWAX shelf. So on here we have a great assortment of all the products, from my favorite throwbacks like the Scrub Daddy Max Power hand sponge to photos that I shot on product bottles, some test products before they were actually released, and then some OG stuff. Actually, that red one I found in my garage when I moved into this house. I could not make that up. So I have a great assortment of new and old TRTLWAX, but of course, being in a garage, it gets to a point where things get dusty and they need to be cleaned. So we took all the product off the shelf to wipe it individually, and then of course wipe down the shelf as well to get rid of all that dirt, dust, and grime, and then organizing everything to both be current products and also the products that I want to be reaching for the most. And though it seems like a lot, I like to change and try everything from day to day, so that's how we're doing it. So from there, it was looking beautiful as it should, and it was time to move on to work on the car itself. So once cleaned up and pulled into the garage, I immediately pulled all of the trim off the car and taped everything up as well, pulling some seals out and cleaning underneath those as not to contaminate any areas we're polishing. One thing to note on this as well is, again, if you didn't remember in the past, everything upward facing, the hood, the roof, the trunk, and the front end and the grille surround and the front bumper have not been repainted. Everything else has been repainted. So you've seen the condition of the OG paint on this car, and then moving to stuff that has been repainted. One of the biggest issues on the car is orange peel, and that tends to be from a poor application of the clear coat, just inconsistent distances or just not good coverage, or just after you paint stuff, often you have to wet sand it and polish it, which maybe got skipped on this car. Regardless as well, the repainted stuff has its number of micro scratches, so we have a lot of work cut out on every inch of this car.
What? You get him a shot, dude.
But here was the real kicker of past body shop work. And as you will see here, this is a piece of painter's tape that got painted over and finally failed when I washed the car. So with the rear bumper removed, you can see the whole thing here, and it was actually a piece of tape over a BMW sticker, as this piece of metal had probably gotten replaced and welded in before. Got a little primer on it, moved the tape back a little bit to cover that edge of primer, put some single stage on it. Luckily, it's in an inconspicuous area, so I'm not incredibly worried about the future visuals of this paint, but anything is better than peeling up painter's tape underneath paint. Next up was going to be deciding which products we'd use, and for that I decided to do a throwback to one of my favorite years in TRTLWAX history, 2019, to when Hybrid Solutions came out. And we're going to be using the polish from that era in ceramic polish and wax. And not only is this a great compound and polish, but it also leaves behind a protective coating, saving you time on the back end with a ceramic coating for your paint. So as we look at the paint, we're going to be polishing here first in the trunk. I do notice a few scratches that are going to be a little bit too deep to take out from its 30 plus years of exposure, but in making sure I'm applying even heavy hand pressure and after a number of passes, here's the result we were able to get. Not bad at all. And again, there are going to be some that are just a little too deep to take out, and it is always a little worrisome working with old paint, wondering how much clear coat you're going to have left. And of course, to show off the qualities of what gets left behind by ceramic polish and wax, you can see on the left there, all of the water beads right off, and on the right, it hangs tight because of the lack of protection and lack of smoothness of the paint. And from water spots, general clarity, and those fingernail scratches in the door cups, we took care of those as well. So an interesting subject is the front end of this car, again, having never been repainted and with plenty of rock chips. My favorite quote from this is, "What's wrong with your front end?" And I was confused when someone asked that. It was just because there were so many rock chips, but there is still some paint there and the general luster can be brought back. Same in the hood, which I did previously polish, but it's seen some weather since then, and it's time to take out a few extra scratches and get that luster back. You can see in a few before and after examples here what we were able to bring back. So now jumping back to a couple of the worst examples of both clarity and orange peel, I wanted to highlight this driver's side. So again, you can see the lack of clarity there, but you'll also see a little bit of waviness in the bodywork itself. And I was worried from the get-go, and rightfully so, because that's not necessarily something you're going to be able to clean up having waves in your bodywork. Regardless, the orange peel was something I could clean up. So with a little bit of wet sanding help, you can already see the improvement in clarity, even having not been polished yet. Of course, from there, polishing is plenty easy. So with a yellow pad being a little bit more aggressive that I had recently switched to, I got that polished up, and let's take a look at the clarity improvement. So orange peel and shine improvement, insane. Overall clarity and wavy improvement, not really possible without doing full body work. We're gonna take what we can get here because it does look much better, and I don't really think there's any Bondo in there by feel, but this ended up actually being the worst part. Clear coat so thin that the orange peel was terrible, and ultimately I went through it via sanding. One session of sanding took me through that clear coat. You know, I was so obsessed with not having any orange peel on this car that I didn't pay attention to the possibility that clear coat could be so thin on something that had been repainted, but it was the case. So that one spot on the C-pillar on the passenger side of the car went through a little bit, but it kind of is what it is. So this car might need some repainting in the future, but to look at the positives for now, the depth and shine of this car is now insane, and we'll call it double protected with the Hybrid Solutions ceramic polish and wax and the ceramic spray coating. Again, I'm here to show you guys everything. I don't want to hide anything, but still, regardless, I don't think I have to say anything about hiding how good this car looks now. I'm stoked. Well, that was positive. It's time to get into stuff I'm not stoked about. Yeah, oil pressure light at idle. Not something you should be dealing with a freshly rebuilt motor. So it was time to delve into what these things could be. Most commonly on these cars, say an oil pump, as the oil pump has a valve that's meant to regulate pressure between the 7 or 8 psi on the low end and a 59 psi on the high end. So hooking a pressure gauge up at my friend Mikey's shop, Bonneville Foreign Service, we took a look at those numbers. So the low end here, the oil pump seems to be doing its job okay, and the high end, the same thing. But the thing here is, again, on a freshly rebuilt engine, these numbers, at least on the low end, should not be happening. I should be somewhere around 15 or more at idle, at temp, and I should not be banging the bottom end of the oil pump's regulatory valve trying to keep it within pressure. It should not be happening on this. So whether it could be the oil pump, which was outfitted by a third-party company, which could affect its performance, or, as I would look up and find, oil squirters exist in this engine. And I say that because I had no idea oil squirters existed in this engine until after the rebuild and after I was looking into what could cause low oil pressure, and that could be high mileage oil squirters. The problem though is, again, I didn't know they existed, so I didn't order new ones. I don't even know if they got put into the engine at all because I don't recall seeing them. That photo that I showed you was me scouring what media I had shot, if I could see if they had been put in at all. And unfortunately, that screenshot was the only media I could find, and that was before it got sent off to the machine shop, so we don't know. So regardless, we planned to do an oil pump job and swap a new one on there, but when the oil pump was out, we were then able to stick a scope up above the crank to hopefully find oil squirter holes with oil squirters in them, and we found holes. Fuck. So in preparing for the worst, I did already have new oil squirters ordered and ready, as well as all the gaskets we'd need. Also, in inspecting the rest of the engine, there was no visible damage or issues due to under oiling or anything of the sort, so that was a huge deal to find. But from there, everything escalated pretty quickly in removing stuff, and if you don't already realize, we need to drop the crank out of the bottom of the engine to get to those oil squirters. This job would normally call for pulling the entire engine out of the car, but we opted to just do it right out of the bottom to possibly save, what, like 10 minutes? And we had also kind of already started on that route, having dropped the oil pan and oil pump, and it's pretty badass to say you had to drop a crank, right? Kinda, not really at all, actually. So again, inspecting damage, there was actually one bit, but it didn't seem to be because of oil. It looked like a piece of foreign matter had gotten into one bearing half. The crank side of it looked totally fine. The other side of the bearing looked totally fine. Fortunately, our friend Sean Bandley, whose nickname is Parts in Stock, had fresh bearings that we could borrow from, and our friend Awaxakins was able to run them up to us. So this being on a late Saturday and not being able to get parts, it was very fortunate that we were able to get the part that we needed, aside from everything else that I already had ordered. So as you can see here, this is the whole process of installing an oil squirter underneath the bearing. You put it in the hole. That's it. So with all of the oil squirters installed in, I don't know, about 2 minutes, we were then able to put everything back that was already there. It's insane that this is what had to happen, but we did it. So let's again jump back to silver linings here, of course. It's extremely fortunate that we, in doing this job, found that bearing that had that score in it. That definitely would create problems in the future that we might not understand. Two, just to be safe, I did put this new oil pump in. We're trying to solve everything at this point, trying to be safe. Everything went back together. This took us 3 days and probably about 25 hours. Silver linings again, having friends like Mikey, Wetzel that are willing to take this on and help you in this case. He understands the process and how this goes and how expensive it can be. So honestly, without him, I don't know where I would be at. Probably somewhere between a 6-letter word that starts with F and ends with uct. So anyway, checking pressure again here. How scary is this? Pretty scary, but that happens. New pump, getting used to it. Suddenly we had pressure. So first thing to check here is making sure that the regulatory valve at the top starts to do its job, and that's cutting pressure at 59 PSI. So yeah, it is close enough there. We actually ended up switching to a different gauge, not only because this is my gauge and I could take it home, but also because we were a little scared that the oil pressure was so high, but we kind of forgot about the whole oil viscosity thing, and as it warms up, the pressure will go down a little bit. So when we realized that, we got a little less worried, and that our 25 hours of work over this whole weekend had actually done something correctly. So with that low enough to reflect what should actually be happening, we went ahead and taped my gauge to my windshield for a sweet mobile setup. Again, check this out, 59 PSI, all good. And then got home with fully heated up 5W40 oil to check final numbers, idle at 15 PSI, 30 PSI at 1600, and 55 PSI at 3100, complete with the 59 PSI cutoff doing its job. So, hey, we did it. Big weekend and low oil pressure now behind us. For a few more mini updates, I decided to order a few fresh keys, not only because I love a little fresh plastic, but I was worried about a non-start issue because of EWS verification. Turned out to just be this key ring, and that fixed everything, and it starts every time now. I also passed admissions, which I didn't expect not to, but that's also exciting to pass. Then the engine here, you might be wondering what this shot is, but of course you didn't notice it because these caps are put in and those are always missing. But no, they're not, even though one just broke yesterday. Pulling this off, I actually got the M3 realigned. You can see the tape was actually moved up a little bit from where it used to be put. It was misaligned or not correct previously. I think the 3 might be a little high though, so that's cool. Shift knob badge here. I kind of do prefer, this being an M3, having the M in there, even though a Lux car is missing a few of those elements normally. This mirror was ugly, so now it's not. I had to replace that. And I dealt with a little bit of ride height adjustment. Ironically, here in the rear is actually a little bit higher than stock, which is really weird to think about. The front is a little bit lower than stock. I also swapped out the offset control arm bushings that weren't supposed to be in there for the centered ones, so my wheel positioning, though not perfectly centered, is a little better. Then I drove down to my good friend Sam Kapp's shop, Kapps European in Pleasant Grove, Utah, threw it on the alignment rack, and I was actually surprised I was very close to start, but he perfected it, and now we are looking at a good stock setup. The front still needs a little bit of adjustment, but I'm going to play with that to deal with caster and feel there. Next, a fueling issue. Sam hooked up his gauge to check my fuel pressure, and I was actually about 3 or 4 PSI low as well. When I shut the car off, the pressure bled off, which it's not supposed to do, meaning something was both wrong with the input pressure and something wasn't holding pressure when the car was shut off. So first I tried the fuel pressure regulator. That didn't change anything, so all that was left is the pump. The pump itself has a regulatory valve in it that doesn't allow fuel to come back to it. So aside from that failing, the pressure was also low from the pump, meaning that the pump was failing. It was also very loud, and I think I know why, seeing that logo, as that's not a very good brand for parts. Sorry. I lasted about 16,000 miles in 4 years, which is a pretty weak showing for a fuel pump. So with an OE1 put back in, I was already feeling at ease before I even started the car, with high hopes of being the right pump to put back in the car. So we can consider fuel pressure solved, but there is still an issue I'm having at the time of recording all this, where the car is dying when it comes to a stop after driving, not just at idle, but we'll figure it out. I have a few hunches. Again, we solved fuel pressure and I'm happy about it. So this might look like deja vu to you, and it absolutely does to me, aside from the ratio of what this differential is. If you recall from the cleaning episode, I did have 2 differentials available to me. I ended up going with the 338 that came with my car, and now with a manual transmission, I'm just not loving how quick it is, mostly on freeway speeds, because I do plan to road trip this car. So I decided to switch to a 315, so taking some of the stock internals out of that, I then had to pull the 338 back out of the car to disassemble both diffs side by side and take the internals that I had put into the 338 back out of the 338 for use now in the 315. Namely the 3 brand new clutches that I had put in, again now going into the diff that I'm going to end up using. So with that all torqued to spec, it was time to put everything back in. Did all fresh seals for the output shafts, and of course then had to put the kibosh on the final seal in the diff cover, put fluid in it the next day, and get it back in the car. Oh, and I finally have a diff tag now. I didn't have one on the 338, so as a nerd, that's pretty exciting. And yes, as some of my seemingly always pessimistic friends have pointed out, at 80 miles an hour, this is only going to lower at about 400 RPM. You're right. But that's kind of a lot when you're doing a road trip, so let's do this. Let's 24,000 less revolutions per hour. And for the sake of this being my video, 336,000 less revolutions per 14-hour trip from Utah to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, my hometown. And yes, my average speed's not going to be 80 miles an hour, but whose car and video is this? It's mine. And I'm happy with the 315. You know what I'm also happy with? A power steering pump that doesn't make noise. So we went ahead and rebuilt that bad boy too. This is actually super easy and I recommend it to people. It's just a few seals and obviously putting these little metal pieces back in whatever it is that they go into in the right orientation, but super simple job. My power steering pump now doesn't make noise. And now that it's been a little while since the polish, you know, it is time to get this car cleaned back up again and looking fresh. The wheels and tires didn't get the most love when we first went to polish, so they're getting some love now. It's exciting to see the beating action on the side of the car, and Boone always staying hydrated. As well, for mini updates, let's keep it rolling. I am a sucker for a good personal vanity plate, and Utah actually just came out with some cool black plates, a vintage style plate recently. So, you know, we had to go ahead and switch to that. I think it's a good fit for a brand style sponsored plate. It keeps it a little bit more nondescript to Utah because I do love that Utah Arches plate. But again, this is a good fit for this project, and a red E36 does fit black trim well, except for kidneys. And for one final piece of work on this car to get it polished up, looking proper, ready for all that the road can offer, we have a Hybrid Solutions Headlight Restoration Kit. And though I've used a number of different TRTLWAX headlight restoration kits in the past, which have all been great, the reason I was excited to use their brand new one is the inclusion of this, and it's the oxidation remover wipes. And at first, I didn't fully understand what this would be accomplishing, but I read the directions and followed along, soon to find out that this was the perfect application for my headlights. Because even though this kit does come with a sanding pad and the option to sand your headlights and smooth it and polish it from there, my headlights don't really need that. They are mostly shiny, but not completely shiny. They do have a little bit of dullness and a little bit of almost yellow oxidation coming through. So what those wipes can do in the 2 minutes you would use them per headlight is remove that light level of oxidation from the headlights and prep for the premium lens clarifying compound. From here, I'm doing easy work with a cotton cloth to restore these to a nice bright and clear shine. As well, I'm doing the turn signals because why not when they're sitting right next to each other, and then moving on to the lens coat fill and seal wipe. And this ends up being one of the most important parts of headlight restoration, as aside from this leaving a coating behind that will fill any final minor imperfections, this is actually sealing the plastic up and protecting it from UV rays like those from the sun. Because no matter how well you polish a plastic headlight, if you don't coat or seal it afterwards, it will still be very susceptible to all of the elements and soon oxidize. So this is kind of it. I mean, it's not ever it. The car is running and driving as it should. And yeah, it's quite the place to be from where we started as an automatic, high mileage, transmission slipping, coolant leaking, noise making, harsh, ugly, dull car to this. It's wild to stand in front of this now. This is such a cool car. This is kind of it. Like, this would be the one I would want to own from this era, in this color, with 4 doors only, so on and so forth. And now I have a freshly rebuilt one that has high mileage on the chassis, but that kind of allows you to not have to worry about how many miles you're putting on the car. You know, if it was a 80,000 mile car, I would be stressed about every 2,000 miles I'm putting on it, or 5,000 miles, and soon I'm at 100,000 and the value's going somewhere that I'm afraid to look at, and it's scary. So this is a very nice corner to be in, out of a car that looks and presents amazing, drives incredible, but I don't have to worry about all of the nitpicky bits on its value or how I'm using it. It's very much the car that I want to build, and I'll keep improving on and changing as I find what I like and what I don't like, but here I am, and I'm really happy. So the ironic piece too is I've just crossed the mark of living in Utah for 10 years. I moved from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, August 16th of 2013 in my 1990 BMW 325 IS. Track tires on the top, as I would soon travel to Monterey for a autocross and track day just after the Rolex Motorsports reunion, more so in junction with the BMW CCA's Oktoberfest that year. And I think that Sam, who didn't work on cars much at that point, would be pretty proud to see what I was able to do now with this car. And of course, TRTLWAX. You know, this started in 2016 when I got the call from an agency saying that they were looking for people that were into cars, detailing, and photos, whatever the case. And yeah, how wild is that now, 7 years later, that we're still working together, and they allowed me to do a project such as this. They've always let me throw wild ideas at them, so a huge shout out and appreciation to them and everybody that's been involved in this. And even at that, everybody that I've met along the way and that are watching this now, especially if you've made it to the end of this, again, longer than 30-minute video, I really do appreciate it. And although I feel like I can only hope, I know I can work hard too in the case of still being able to do this in the future, and obviously only because of those viewing it, appreciating it, and so on. So before this gets to 40 minutes long, I'm going to sign out. Thank you, and talk to you soon.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's so cool in here. I'm Carl's here, dude.
How is that long?
Jantz just took the dog out to pee, went inside, came out to tell us.
My wife's water just broke, so we are off to the hospital to have the baby.
Dang, dude. I knew there was a reason I came down here.
Yeah, you got, bro. It was like right as you arrived.
Bounce it